thanks to Metropolis Comics and Collectiibles for hosting this interview. I'm here at Metropolis Comics with artist J Scott Campbell, who is most well known for creating Danger Girl, as well as his work on Gen 13 and The Amazing Spider-Man, as well as a huge number of covers for pretty much every publisher there is. Scott, I'd like to ask you a few questions.
Of course, go right ahead.
First, I have to ask, I noticed that the other day you retweeted somebody who wants you to draw Sailor Moon characters. Does that mean you're going to start doing that?
Well, my wife, that's her favorite thing in the world. My wife, Tanya, loves Sailor Moon. So I thought it was funny that somebody had mentioned that, and I was hoping she would actually see the retweet because she loves Sailor Moon. I forget which one exactly. I think it's Saturn Moon. I hope I'm on video here, so I better get it right. But I think that's a thing. But yeah, so it's certainly possible. I mean, it's probably would be like a fan art thing, probably, because I'm not sure who publishes Sailor Moon, if that's even a comic right now. But you never know. You might see me drawing Sailor Moon in the very near future.
If she finds out, she's gonna force you to do it.
she's been trying to force me for a while. I'm kind of shocked it hasn't worked because usually she's pretty persuasive when it comes to what she wants. But we'll get to it.
What are your favorite comic books when you were a kid?
You know, it's funny. My earliest comic book that I do count it as a comic book was Mad Magazine. Actually, I loved Mad Magazine before I even loved or even discovered really, for real. Like, I mean, I was always aware of like Spider-Man and Batman, but they were always peripherally like around, like either in cartoon form and stuff like that. And then I remember seeing Mad Magazine, and I just was super into it. And I mimicked the artwork of a caricature artist that I still admire to this day, named Mort Drucker, and he would do these great movie parodies and stuff like that. So my earliest artwork actually was caricature based. I would just love to figure out how he did the character so well. And you'll even see on my Instagram, I'll even occasionally still dabble in caricature. Like I just posted a David Bowie as like the Goblin King recently, and you'll see that Mad Magazine influence that's still there. But that was my very first one. But I think it wasn't until high school that I discovered X-Men, and to me, X-Men was my entrance into real comic book collecting, and particularly the annuals drawn by Arthur Adams. I just loved those, and that was probably the real first comic book in the sense of like superheroes.
Nice. Cool. Did you always want to be a comic book artist?
No, not necessarily always. Like I said, I did discover Mad Magazine early on, but even then I wasn't thinking, oh, I'll work for Mad Magazine. I just liked the artwork and tried figuring out the caricatures. And but for the longest time, I thought I was going to pursue animation. I think Who Framed Roger Rabbit had come out, and I always enjoyed cartoons, and I had bought the book, The Illusion of Life, which is this gigantic like Bible of a book of how to animate. It's like, I just remember thinking it was the biggest book I'd ever seen in my life at the time, and I think that just gave me a love affair with like animation, and Disney animation in particular. And I really thought that was going to be my trajectory for the longest time. And then, like I said, I kind of discovered X-Men and comic books. And at the time, I think the Batman movie was coming out, the very first Batman movie, the Tim Burton one. And I read some interview with Tim Burton. And Tim Burton, surprisingly, I found out was not just a movie director, but had actually been an animator for Disney. And I was going, oh, that's so peculiar. Why didn't he stick with that? And he, in this interview, said, one day I woke up and I realized I don't think I could be the guy who draws the enchanted butterfly scene for 6 months. And I was going like, oh, maybe I don't want to be that guy either. And I started realizing, but that was kind of like a slow process. And I think also ultimately comic books just kind of stole me away because I like the identity you can have in comic books. In comic books you can kind of have a more personal, I think, style. And even though I've come to find out many animators like Glenn Keane stuff have had their personal style come through with their animation at Disney, I still think I made the right choice because, again, with comic books, you kind of really get to have your own personal style that people know you for, and they really ultimately follow you for that. And you can take that style to all different kinds of publishers and different concepts, and that's what I really like about comic books.
Nice.
That was a long answer.
Your website makes it sound like you're crazy busy. Do you still have time to read comics?
That's a good question. It's not far off. I am usually pretty crazy busy, probably from my own doing. I make myself too busy than I really need to be. But I don't get to read comics as much as I'd like. Usually I am the type of guy who waits for the buzz of some particular comic book to reach a fever, or I'll, if it's certain guys that I know in the business who I know are working on something that they're really proud of, I'll usually seek it out. but unfortunately I don't really get to. I know that right now the House of X, I've been hearing a tremendous buzz on, so I'm probably gonna circle back and probably buy those issues, or maybe get the trade paperback and see what that's all about, because again, it's one of those ones that just seem to rise to above the noise. So I've got to be very selective. It's much like with TV now. If I watched every show that's out there, I'd never get anything done. But I'll wait for those shows people talk about, and I go like, oh yeah, maybe I should watch, The Boys, or whatever these different books or shows that are out there. I'll usually wait for there to be such a buzz. I can't resist it. I'm on the outs if I don't watch it. So
if you haven't checked it out already, you should check out Scooby-Doo Apocalypse.
Oh yeah, that's a good. You highly recommend that one, huh?
Yeah.
Where do I find that one? Is that on?
You can go to Eastside Magazine, get it, part of it.
Nice. This is a comic book you're talking about, not a show. Oh, good.
It's where
Keith Giffen plots it.
Is that right?
Yeah.
How did I not know about this? This is fantastic. And it's called Scooby-Doo Apocalypse?
Yeah, so it's basically where everyone in the world besides the Scooby-Doo characters are turned into monsters.
Oh, wow. That sounds fun.
Well,
it's
besides a few special people.
You gotta have some special people.
And the gang has to try and find out, how to turn everyone back.
Wow, that's cool. Or should I say, wow.
Zoinks.
Wow.
I read that you got your first job in comics at Wildstorm by answering an ad to send in artwork. When Jim Lee called you to offer you a job right after that, did you believe it was him, or did you think it was a friend pranking you?
That's actually a really good question. That's not far off. I kind of didn't think it was him, actually, to be perfectly honest, because in my world, Jim Lee was a celebrity, and I remember thinking, too, because I'd sent my samples in, because back then you had to do it by the mail. Yeah, we had these things called envelopes, and they were pretty wild.
How old are you?
Pretty ancient. You gotta get the dust off. I'm rusting. But yeah, no, that was but a good tip that did work back then was I drew on the actual envelope, which I thought was a really good. It was like a big manila envelope, and I figured I'll cover it with artwork, and then he'll have to open it. And sure enough, I think it worked, because he called me within about a week of sending it, which I thought was unheard of. I thought, it was going to take 6 to 8 weeks, like I'm ordering a hose or something like that, or some sort of online thing, or a television ad. But yeah, he called me within a week, so that part was a little alarming. I was wait a second, it can't be him. Why would he call me in a week? But then I was like, who else would know to call me? But I did think that. I did think maybe my parents might have been pranking me. You're not far off with that question, but it was really him, and yeah, I was very excited, and that's pretty much. I was out in San Diego, I think, within a month, working at my first comic book studio.
Wow. Do you need some lamp oil or something?
Lamp oil? I mean, sure. Get my rusting out. I saw what you did there.
When you started working on Gen 13, it took a few issues before you were listed as a co-writer. Was that a job you wanted from the beginning, or did it just grow out of how you, Jim Lee, and Brandon Choi were collaborating?
I think more the latter. I think it's funny, years ago when I first was able to spend some time with Stan Lee, which is really cool, one of the first questions he asked me, he goes so how do you do comic books? Do you do it the regular way or the Marvel way? And I was like, the Marvel way? I was like, well, what's the Marvel way, Stan? And he goes, well, the Marvel way is like when I would go over to Steve Ditko, or I go, to Jack Kirby, and I'd say Jack, in this issue, the Fantastic Four goes down to the bottom of the sea. And when they're down at the bottom of the sea, Namor comes up to Sue Storm, and he's enchanted with Sue Storm, and he steals her away. And the Fantastic Four get into a big battle, and they fight the Submariner, and by the end of the issue, they make it back up to the surface, and everything's fine again. So, draw that. And I guess Jack Kirby would draw that, and then Stan would go in and he'd add the word balloons to what he saw was going on, and I guess that was the Marvel way. And in many ways, I guess, when I was doing Gen 13, not knowing it, I was doing it Stan's Marvel way, because Jim would rough out just these bubble figures to kind of map out the book. I would just look over his shoulder, and he'd rough it all out, and there was no script or anything. It was just this sort of movement of shapes through the book, and I knew certain things were certain scenes, and I would go basically and fill in the gaps kind of. And then by issue 3, I was that guy doing the bubble figures, because Jim did the first 2 issues, and then I would kind of just figure out the plot, and then Brandon would come in and add the dialogue and stuff like that. So I think at that point, the contribution was just maybe at that point maybe so obvious that they just thankfully did see that I was pretty much creating plot at this point, and therefore made me a co-writer slash co-creator, because at that point I was also fleshing out the characters' personalities and that sort of thing. So, which was super cool of them. I'm sure they could have got away without doing that, and I would have just been none the wiser, but because I was just happy to be there at that point. But yeah, that was super cool of them.
Nice. It seems like every now and then you're considered controversial. In Marvel Comics number 1000, you even made fun of yourself in an old controversy about your cover for Amazing Spider-Man
Right.
601. Do you think controversy is just a part of being popular?
That's a really good question, actually. I mean, there's been theories that that certain pop artists would create, like, I think they used to say that Michael Jackson used to put stories out about being in the cryogenic chamber and stuff like that because he liked that it created discussion. I don't know if that's true or not. I can guarantee you I don't do that for that reason, but I can't say that it's been... I do see, I'm not going to lie, when there usually some controversy bubbles up, I do see my Twitter followers go up in numbers. I don't know why that is. It usually doesn't go the other direction. I think there's also a term out there called, bad news is still good news, or any news is good news, or something like that. It doesn't matter if it's bad or good, that it's news is news and it helps you. I guess so. I still don't think it's a good strategy to seek it out in that sense. More recently I've been pushing back because I think there was this sort of thought process of, well, don't engage and don't sort of like, and I still generally think that's true. If you got sort of noisy critics that aren't really critics but just kind of are online, like, bullies or whatever you want to call it, usually the best tactic is to tend to ignore it. But I think there was a tide turning where I think people who followed me and really enjoyed my artwork kind of wanted me to sort of stand up for them, even too, in a way, right? So I think you always got to take your temperature with that, though. There's never really a reason. Unfortunately, there's not really a reason that fits every single situation. But yeah, I think we're just living in a world where everybody has a voice because of social media. And occasionally, just you gotta tussle, I guess, a little bit, which is unfortunate. But hey, it is what it is. And I always thought comic books, in a way, in my opinion, comic books are fun because they are a little dangerous. I think that's what makes them exciting. I remember I was telling somebody else just today, like when I used to watch Saturday morning cartoons, that got me into the medium. But then when I walked in my first comic book shop, I remember thinking like, oh, this is cool because these feel... This is the stuff I like on Saturday morning cartoons, but it feels a little edgier. It feels a little more like, ooh, there's something like this. Maybe I have to hide this from my parents because it's a little too dangerous or edgy, And I like that excitement of comic books, and I think, to me, that's always still where I point my compass when it comes to drawing comic books. I like it to be a little dangerous or a little bit controversial or a little bit edgy, because I think, to me, that's what comic books spoke to me about when I first went in there. I wasn't buying the Star. There was back when Marvel would make comic books about like Care Bears that they put under the Star label. I was like, this isn't a Star comic. This is a comic book for like young adults and teenagers and yes, adults kind of. And to me, I like it to be that way. I know there's been this movement because all these big companies like Disney and Warner Bros. Have scooped up these comic book companies, and now they're under these bigger labels that everything has to be family entertainment. Well, I don't necessarily always think that's absolutely the case, and thankfully there's some people in Marvel who still like it to be a little edgy, so I'm sure we'll ruffle some feathers in the future. I don't think those days are over.
I like the comics that make my parents go,
Yeah, exactly. He gets it. You know what you're talking about.
You are here tonight for your art opening at Metropolis Gallery. How did you get the idea for putting the show together?
Well, I wish I could take credit for that. I work with a very talented woman in my organization named Marilyn, and she spoke with the owners of the gallery and kind of, I think she met them maybe about 3 years ago or something like that. So they knew each other, and I think an opportunity just kind of came up, I think a little bit organically, I'm not exactly sure, but it was actually kind of brought up to me after they were discussing it, and I liked the idea. I thought it was kind of fun and exciting and different. It's funny, I first thought I didn't have enough pieces for a gallery, and then I'm out there and going like, oh my gosh, there's so many pieces. So it shows as an artist, sometimes you don't always know what you have in a drawer. But yeah, so it's fun to kind of get, and I think in my own situation, I think I was doing other things with business with comic books in the last few years. I was kind of being entrepreneurial and creating a business, an online business where people order special covers from me and stuff like that. So I'd kind of taken my eye off of the sale of original art for the last few years. In fact, we weren't really aggressively looking to find new buyers for original art. So this was a fun idea to kind of like say, hey, like and it's a great gallery because you can see all the wonderful art that adorns the wall, to sort of find perhaps new people who might be exposed to my artwork and the original artwork that I have and stuff like that, and maybe open up a whole new interest in that. So that's kind of the idea, is just to kind of say, hey, just a reminder, I know you guys know my art, but here's the original art. Maybe you didn't know where to find it before, and here it is, and like that kind of thing. So that's fun. That's a neat thing.
Wow. When you advertised your show, they wrote that there is $750,000 of art in the show.
Ooh.
Does it ever seem strange to you that you can create almost $1 million of art on your own?
Yeah, and it's probably as valuable as Bitcoin. No, I'm just joking. No. I mean, it's flattering to read that. I promise you, that's not in my pocket right now. But that is very exciting to sort of like see that. It is flattering to think that maybe perhaps in some way that is the value you've created and stuff like that. But yeah, I don't take that. I don't let that get to my head too much, really, because again, it's art's a funny thing. It's very subjective. It can go up and down. It's much like the stock market or something like that, or Bitcoin. But I feel very good about it, and I don't put a lot of my artwork out there. So usually I don't do commissions anymore, because the artwork I create is the artwork that goes on the comic books pretty much, and it's like there's no real other way to get it. So if people are a fan, they want something that's been published, just like these other pieces that have gone on into history, I guess, for other comic book covers and interiors, then it is special. And I like that it's special, that it's one of a kind, and you can't, it's not mass produced. It trips me out even to see certain covers that I see out there and go like, oh my gosh, I have to tell myself that's not a reproduction, that is the cover. And it could be anywhere in the world, but it's right here on this wall. Like, that's weird, but cool, and that's where the value comes from. And if you can have a little piece of that, and it's an artist you really enjoy, that's really cool. So hopefully there's different people out there. I see some red dots on some of the pieces already that people are taking home. So hopefully they'll have a little piece of that themselves, where they can go, oh, this could be anywhere in the world, but right now it's on my wall, and it's like people can walk up and see those little eraser marks and those little imperfections that are only in an original piece of art. It's not cleaned up for consumption. It's the real thing.
You're just as weird as my dad, not wanting to have $3 million in your pocket.
Well, it's $3 million is overrated. Just paper. We all see what that looks like.
I don't know what's wrong with adults these days. They're just blowing my mind.
Yeah.
Not in the good way.
Those are our envelopes.
Internet haters. New York Comic Con is on right now, and there's always a crazy line at your booth. Do you ever get to just walk around?
Yeah, actually, the cool thing about it is in more recent years, because of many, reevaluating of how we do things, I actually get to walk around more than I ever used to, actually, strangely enough, because now we have very isolated periods of time where I do sign, and I sign from like a 2-hour block, and then I have a nice lunch break where I don't have to stress about it, and then I come back and have another 2-hour block. And that's great, because then people know you're there for that period of time, and then you're not there. And that's good, for your fan base, because I used to think, oh, I have to be at this booth all the time, because I have to be able to be there to catch anybody who just happens to wander by. But sometimes that doesn't work out so well, because sometimes you will be standing there when nobody's around, stuff like that. And I'll have colleagues come out and like, oh, I thought there'd be more people here. You kind of get that sort of thing going on where people do that. And I think what this is great is like you have a concentrated signing period where people come and find you, and then you are really busy for 2 hours, and then you walk away and you can go and visit and do other things. And it's actually worked out really, really well, because now people know to catch me at a specific time. And if they don't, I'm gonna not be there. And also too, it takes a lot of preparation in advance too, because my booth is filled with pre-signed merchandise. So I'll sometimes, before a show like this, be signing for 4 days in a row, which is not super exciting. But but that means I sign all the comic books, and then they're put into bags, have COAs, prints are signed in advance, put away in boxes, sent out. So all the merchandise that shows up at the booth is already pre-done. So if I do walk away and people do happen to miss me, there's still this sense like, well, here's all this merchandise, and he has touched it all, and he has signed it all, and it's all been. It's kind of had an element of that personal
His
experience.
DNA is all over.
And it's all you take that as you will. But that's if they want that personal experience in a way, they can kind of still get it if I've walked away and they still have these signed comics. Because sometimes people, with the eBays and those internet things you kids are talking about these days, they like to trade these things. I've been hearing about.
You should cost extra for everything you touch.
I do. I go like, oh, that's $20.
I'm glad I got.
I'll charge him later.
I'm glad I got to meet you here. Thanks for answering my questions.
Absolutely, Carl. It's a real pleasure. I enjoyed your questions. They're very good questions. Actually, I really enjoyed them quite a bit.